BC Rich have to be one of the most iconic guitar brands in history. From the most important funk bass lines of the 1970s to being played by rock and roll icons, dominating the 80s hard rock and hair metal scene, and expanding to virtuosic shredders, thrash metal, death metal, and beyond. BC Rich were the kings. And then it all stopped. The BC Rich brand has gone through a lot of hands over the years, and with every trade, it's decreased in relevancy, which I think is a real shame. Today, BC Rich faces problems, some that are no fault of their own, others which absolutely are, but they also have a lot of things going for them that other brands would kill for. So today, I don't want to just cover the problems of BC Rich, I want to talk about the things that they've got going for them and what they could do to really push them to the next level. Because I'm coming from a personal perspective, BC Rich were always one of my favourite guitar brands. I was drawing Ironbirds in my school book before I even owned a guitar. I'm passionate about the brand, and seeing some of the things, it's kind of a little bit sad. So I'm going to start off with the problems that BC Rich face. Fan base. BC Rich have a dedicated, die-hard fan base. And that's normally a good thing. It will be mentioned again in this video as a pro, but as a con, it is a unique challenge for BC Rich. See, BC Rich have a very long history. They've been around since 1969. There's way too much history to cover here, but what you need to know if you don't know anything about them is that they originated as a custom shop. All the famous BC Riches that you see, probably the most in the compilation at the beginning of this video, were all custom handmade guitars. And that ultimately means that most people envision the handmade customs when they think about BC Rich. Now, in the relatively recent times, BC Rich traded hands. Think around 2014, 15, 16, around that time roughly, BC Rich traded and then it just sort of died. It just sat there. They disappeared. And that meant that the die-hard fan base didn't have any guitars to wish they had, so they had to look back. They had to think about guitars that they wished they could have. And a problem with that is that everybody thinks of something different. So now, flash forward to BC Rich under a new ownership as of, I think, 2019, 2020, around that time. Well, everybody wanted something different. And that adds a lot of pressure. It's a unique challenge. I've never seen it on any other brand. When Jackson posts up a guitar that they're making, people either say they like it or they don't, and most of the time they like it. When BC Rich posts up a guitar that they're making, there's comments littered with, it should have this headstock. Oh, I wish it would have this bridge. It should be in this colour. It should be this fretboard wood. And to the point where it's a custom request from everybody. And that's not a great position to be in if you're trying to sell production guitars. Admittedly, there are a lot of other bigger problems that you could have, but it's still not a great one to have. But with that said, I do believe that it could be turned around into BC Rich's favour with relative ease. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on in the video. But I can give BC Rich, the current management of BC Rich, I can give them the pass on that, because they're inheriting that problem from a historical brand. This next one is a problem of their entire own doing, and it's a big one. It's their social media. In today's day and age, everybody's got one of these in their pockets. There's a chance you're watching this video on one of these right now. There's also a chance that you're sitting on the toilet watching, but, you know, let's not think too much about that. The point being is that you can access a lot of people on the web, and if you're selling guitars as a guitar brand, that's something that should not be overlooked. BC Rich are doing just that. Across 3 social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. On Twitter they've got 32.3 thousand followers, on Instagram it's 176,000, and on Facebook it's 292,000 followers. That is 500,000 followers. Of course, there'll be a little bit of overlap of those followers, but for the most part, that's 500,000 potential customers. And BC Rich have, there's no other word for it, neglected them. On Twitter, with their smallest amount of followers, 32,000, but still 32,000 potential customers, BC Rich posted last in February of 2022. It's 3 years ago. On Facebook, the last post was in July of 2024. 1 year ago. On Instagram, it's their most recent post was the 1st of February of actually this year. So that's good-ish. It is July. But prior to that, their previous post was the 6th of September 2024. I cannot wrap my head around it. Now look, I get being adverse to social media, but we're talking about just posting a few pictures of guitars. Even reposting people who are playing your guitars. There are plenty of brands that do that and have invested in that community, and it pays off for them. You know, we're talking about 500,000 potential customers here that you can access for free. We're not even talking about an advertising budget on social media. You don't have to advertise. This is free, and you're not doing it. I cannot wrap my head around that. And it's not like they have ceased producing guitars at all. In fact, just recently, guitars arrived at some of their dealers. New guitars, cool looking guitars. Does anybody know about them? No, because they haven't been posted about by anybody. Not even BC Rich. The most social media posting they're probably getting is this video me mentioning that there's new BC Rich guitars available. That's crazy. It shouldn't be that way. I don't know how many people I'm talking to right now. It could be 1,000, it could be 10,000, it could be tens of thousands of people who will watch this video. But whatever number it is, it's not zero, which is currently what BC Rich are getting by not posting anything. It's not great. And speaking of which, follow my Instagram at KDHGuitarTV, and if you don't have Instagram, could you drop a like on this video if you've watched so far, because we are still going through a list of things. Distribution. If you're in the US and you're looking to buy a new BC Rich, you're in luck. They're stocked in Sweetwater and Guitar Center, and that's great because you've got a good coverage of the US with that. If you're in Europe, you're out of luck. Thomann used to be a dealer for BC Rich, but now it seems that they've stopped and they've got a handful left that they're just trying to get rid of. But after that, they're not a dealer of BC Rich. In Europe, the continent, you've got Andertons. But Andertons, while being in the continent of Europe, they're not in the trading of the EU, which means that most people from the EU are much less likely to buy. I know I am, because it's got all the import taxes. And also, you'd be buying in pounds. UK pounds are higher value than a euro or a dollar. For example, there's a BC Rich Warlock, a new one, the ones that BC Rich haven't talked about. They've just come out and they're available on Sweetwater for $1,499. If I bought the same guitar from Andertons for £1,499, that would work out at over $2,000 just on currency conversion. There are no BC Rich dealers in the European Union, and I kind of understand why. I've talked to dealers, at least in Ireland, and they've said the pointy guitars are a nightmare to sell for them. You get them a Les Paul, a Strat, a Tele, easy. But BC Rich isn't that. If anything, I think BC Rich would benefit more so from being a direct-to-customer dealership. And they kind of are. They have guitars available for sale on their website, but next to none. I think there's a total of 17 guitars available for sale on the BC Rich site. It's just a bit of a mess, especially if you're in this part of the world. Guitar bloat. So far, I'm sure I've come across a little bit harsh, and I would agree, especially in the social media side of things. I didn't really hold anything back there, but that's because I'm passionate about the brand, and good news, I think that the current ownership of BC Rich is also passionate about the brand. I think it's plain to see, and I would take that 1,000 times over than someone who just didn't care and was in it for a quick buck. This feels like it's guitar players behind it, and they care about BC Rich. You know, we want an Ironbird, we want a Mockingbird, we want a Warlock, we want a Warbeast. We want all these shapes. BC Rich has so many shapes. But at the same time, and then again, maybe it is kind of bowing to the fan base, like I was talking about, who demand, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that, I want that. There is maybe some of that, but it feels like it's kind of, the line has been designed by a guitar player. I've got the numbers here, actually. I counted them up. The website is hard to deal with because it kind of refreshes the page's order, so it's hard to tell just how many guitars there are exactly, but I counted up roughly. The Prophecy series has 16 guitars, with 50 colour variations. The Extreme series has 17 guitars with 36 colour variations, and the Legacy series has 19 guitars with 36 colour variations. And that's excluding basses. That just seems like far too many, because at the end of the day it's going to be a gamble. You've got a customer base who are demanding all sorts of different things, and then you have to kind of guess, alright, with the factory I want 50 of these guitars in black, I want 20 of them in purple, I want 30 of them in orange, I want 10 of them in green, and you just kind of have to hope that you'll sell that many. It's a gamble, and it just seems like there's way too many guitars available, and it doesn't help that there's really no description of what the Prophecy series is and how it differs from the Extreme series and how that differs from the Legacy series. There's nothing on the website. It just, I don't know, the lineup, it feels like it's bloated. It feels like guitar players wanted all these things, but the business side of things, it doesn't line up. And the thing is that that's just the guitars available on the website. There are plenty of guitars that BC Rich have for sale that are not on their website. Another problem, I would argue, because there's like those crackled warlocks that I was talking about previously. They're available for sale from BC Rich dealers. They're not mentioned on the BC Rich website. So more guitars. There's so many. And that's just the guitars that are for sale and that are on the website. What about the ones that they've made but have not placed for sale? There's been a number of Instagram posts that date over a year old where BC Rich has shown off guitars that are rather promising. They looked good, they received very good feedback in the social media comments, and people are still wondering to this day where they are. There was like a 9-string Junior V, there was the Stealths, there was a green one and a white one, they had Kahlers. The comments were in favor of them, and they were supposedly getting QC, and then just nothing. They're just over a year old now. No one's bought them because no one had the chance to buy them. They just don't exist. And this really only makes me scratch my head more so in the fact that BC Rich have posted about guitars that you can't buy, but have not posted about guitars that you can buy. Crazy stuff on the social media side of things. I do not get it. But with that said, these are guitars that are imported. They are made in a factory and then they are shipped to BC Rich headquarters, I think, in Florida. They are made in Korea, at least some of them, and I think now they're kind of moving more towards made in India. And, you can agree or disagree with specs. I think they are a little bit pricey in the sense of, like, they're competing with guitars with like things like stainless steel frets. People like stainless steel frets, and that's a selling point. Now, I'm aware that you can get terrible quality stainless steel and make stainless steel frets, and great quality nickel frets and make frets that are much stronger. But the general guitar buying population doesn't think about that. A stainless steel fret is a stainless steel fret to them, and it's a spec that a lot of people expect for 1500 and plus. So it's a shame that BC Rich doesn't have that. Now, but the point is that these are import guitars, they're made in a factory somewhere else, and they're shipped to BC Rich headquarters in Florida. That has end results. Like I was saying, there's a bit of a gamble. You have to guess that black will be the most popular colour and orange will be the second most popular colour. You have to buy in that guess. And when you don't sell guitars, you're kind of stuck with them, and you have to shift them somehow. It seems to me that BC Rich have one of two problems. Either they've got a big QC problem, a lot of guitars being made that didn't stick the landing from factories, or there were a lot of guitars that they couldn't sell at retail price. Because you can go onto Franklin Guitar Works, a guitar reseller in bulk. They buy guitars off brands and they then sell them off as B stock. BC Rich have sold 148 guitars as B stock through Franklin Guitar Works. There's hundreds of guitars here, and they're all listed with excellent condition and minor scratch marks, things that you'd pick up in a guitar store on a guitar store floor, which makes me feel like these are guitars that not necessarily didn't pass QC, but more so just couldn't be sold at the minimum advertised price in the stores. The prices. Now, I know I've been very negative so far, and trust me, throughout the rest of the whole video, it's going to be all positive. We have to talk about the negatives first, and there's one last one I have to mention, and that's the price. Because, specifically on the BC Rich handcrafted guitars, it is insanely high. A BC Rich, like I mentioned in the beginning, they are a custom shop. That's kind of where they started off. Handmade guitars, building custom guitars. And they still do that. You can order it, and it's made, I think, by Neil Moser and his group of guys. But the guitars are very, very, very expensive. We're talking 10 grand. $10,000. Which is a lot. Like a huge amount. And you have to ask yourself, who's buying these? These are not high volume orders, nor are they going to be new customers. These are being sold to the established customer base that's really in there for the legacy of the brand, rather than buying a BC Rich guitar because it's the best, it's quality, it does this. It's not being sold that way. It's being sold to someone who wants a BC Rich because they wanted a BC Rich in 1980 as well. And that works for now, but it's not going to work forever. And a guitar brand should be able to survive more than just on nostalgia. Let's get into the positives, what BC Rich have going for them, and how they can fix some of these negatives. The second-hand market. I've talked about this before when I'm talking about other brands, but what is the one common enemy that all the big ones face? You know, Gibson and Fender and PRS. The big competition that they face is themselves from the past. Because they've produced so many guitars, a Fender Strat from 2 years ago on the second-hand market isn't all that different from a Fender Strat from today on the new market. The big difference is that if I buy it on the second-hand market, Fender doesn't get the money, and if I do buy the new one, they do. But the guitar themselves doesn't really differ. Whereas BC Rich is among a small number of guitar brands where they're not fighting against themselves from the past. If you look at the second-hand market, there doesn't really seem to be that many of the decent guitar. Like, there's loads of the Bronze Series starter pack Warlocks available, but even then they're overpriced. The BC Rich prices on the second-hand market are very high because there just aren't that many. It seems like they're pretty hard to find, and that means that the prices are very high, which means you're not really, as a guitar brand, you're not really competing against that. It seems like even the high-end custom shop stuff, we were talking about that just a second ago, 10 grand for a new one, you know, it's between 8, 9, 10 for a used one, an old one. And normally that would be alright if your new guitars were matching the prices of the second-hand guitars. But in that case, I think just the second-hand prices are so out of the range of most people that matching them doesn't really help you in any way. But the point being is that BC Rich are in a unique position to where they're not competing against the second-hand market. So they can produce guitars now with modern features like Evertunes, stainless steel frets, Fishman pickups and all of that, and or locking tuners as well. It's not competing with any of the guitars that they've previously made. Fan base. I mentioned that BC Rich had problems with their fan base, all demanding different things, and yes, that is a problem, but at its core, it's not a problem, because their fan base is so dedicated, any brand would kill to have them. Like, we're talking about a fan base that kept BC Rich alive when BC Rich weren't. So dedicated to those guitars and being such fans, the second-hand market is massively high. There is a demand for these guitars. There is, because this is a fan base that loves these instruments and no one else does them. Legacy. If you've ever heard any of the Gibson corporate talk, you'll hear that they'll call themselves an iconic brand with a rich legacy, and they won't stop talking about that. And they do that because there's intrinsic value in a legacy. There is, and Gibson are owned by a hedge fund. It makes sense that they are looking at value and the value of their brand. I would argue that BC Rich rivals that legacy, and genuinely. Right now, there is this feeling that it's just a metal brand, but it's not. If you look at the history, Bernard Edwards was funking it up on an Eagle bass. Yes, it has a core rooted history in death metal and thrash metal and hair metal, but you can play blues, you can play rock, you know, Aerosmith, Thin Lizzy. you can do that stuff on BC Riches too. It's got a wide variety of genres that can be played on it. You just need to promote that. The BC Rich Mockingbird or the Eagle could easily be used in place of a Les Paul and not look out of place at all. So it's incredibly varied because that legacy exists. These guitars could be used for anything. And it's not to say that a metal-orientated guitar brand is bad per se. Like, take a look at Jackson. Great example. They're doing very, very well. Granted, probably their most popular model is a Super Strat. BC Rich have Super Strats too. They've got the Gunslinger, they've got the Assassin, they've got, I think the new one is called the Shredzilla, which I actually quite like. Something new. But all the R&D is done. You've got such a rich history and legacy of these guitars, these shapes, the headstocks, all of that. Like, it's kind of ready to go. It's just getting it to the people who need it and making sure that they know that it's available. So I've listed out the problems that I see with BC Rich, as well as the things that they really have going for them. How do I think that they could use it for their own benefit and become a huge brand? Well, here's what I would do. So if I look at all the problems that I listed out, right, the fan base being dedicated but all wanting a different thing, really hard to achieve with a production guitar. Social media, well, they could fix that right now by posting stuff on social media, but still social media. The distribution being a mess, the too many guitars feeling bloated with all these different color variations, and then they have to kind of guess on what color variations will sell well. Import guitars, they have to do the QC in America. Are those B-stock guitars that they're selling off actual B-stock because the QC wasn't good from the imports, or is it because they didn't get the right colors and they didn't sell as well? And also the handcrafted price, the prices for those handcrafted guitars, you're getting like tiny group of people who will buy those at those prices. Other than that, you're kind of alienating almost everybody. How could you take advantage of the pros? The second-hand market being very much in their favour. The fan base also being very much in their favour. They want to support BC Rich. The legacy and all the R&D is done. They've got such a rich legacy. They've got all the shapes you could ever need as a guitar brand ready to go. All of that. So how could BC Rich fix all the problems that I've listed simultaneously, as well as taking advantage of the positives that they've got going for them? Well, I can think of one thing, but it requires investment. Think about any US guitar brand. Any single one of them, they all have their own shop. And I think BC Rich should go with them on that. At present, they are a guitar brand. A brand that gets a design made in India, it's shipped out, and that's it. That's YouTuber brand stuff. This could be so much more. If they opened up their own shop, their own CNCs, right? It doesn't have to be the premium handmade stuff. You can still keep doing that. Get Neil Moser to do all the handmade stuff, and people, those who are happy to pay 10 grand plus for those, will still be happy to do that. But get US made guitars. Like a Gunslinger is realistically a pretty simple design. It's a bolt-on Super Strat with a humbucker and a Floyd Rose. That is not rocket science. Like, take a look at what Kiesel do. Kiesel have guitars, like I think the cheapest neck-through guitar is like $1,900, something around that. But I don't think anyone actually pays that price. I think everybody pays a bit more because of the options, the upcharges. Upcharges on color, woods, finish, frets, pickups, bridges, hardware, all of that. If BC Rich shifted from import to US made and focused more on volume rather than high margins on imports, they would, I think, absolutely succeed. Look how it would fix the problems. Firstly, the fan base. Everybody who wants, oh, I'd buy that guitar but it needs a different headstock. Absolutely. For $80 more, you can get a pointed headstock on your Mockingbird, or you can get a Widow headstock, or you can get, anything that you want from the BC Rich catalog. Yes, it's an upcharge. You can do it. So any of that. Social media, well, you'd constantly have stuff to post about instead of waiting 6 to 8 months and getting orders delayed from import factories. Your distribution will sell direct. makes more sense. Those who want a BC Rich will go to BC Rich to get a BC Rich rather than have to go through a dealer. You would pretty much completely get rid of the whole too many guitars bloat issue that you have when ordering guitars to try and appease this large fan base, because you can just make whatever is required. If everybody's ordering Ironbirds, then you don't have to make 100 warlocks. You can just wait for the orders. And then you also don't have to worry about the B stock guitars, the import factory QC. You do everything yourself. Now, it requires an investment, but think about literally every US made guitar factory or US guitar brand. Some of them do have imports, a lot of them do, but PRS have their own factory, Fender have their own factory, Jackson have their own factory, Charbel have their own factory, Gibson have their own factory, James Tyler have their own factory, Suhr have their own factory. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can start out small. It requires investment, and it requires you doing it right. You get one shot, one opportunity to get this right. Because if you mess up, then you get the reputation. So I just think that if they did that right, they would be sitting on an absolute gold mine. And I'd love to see it, because BC Rich, at its core, it's right here for me. They were the guitarists that I saw before I even played guitar that went, that's what a rock star uses. I want to be like that. So it would be really cool to see that in its glory days, maybe even better than its glory days. If a guitar brand moved out of the past, but still honoured its legacy. I couldn't think of anything better. So that was a very long and frankly a bit ranty video at the beginning, but I'm passionate about this. I would love to see BC Rich succeed, because it would be really cool, wouldn't it? So let me know what you think in the comments. Let BC Rich know what you think in the comments. Do you think that they could do it? I think they could. I think it would be really cool. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.